Come on, start recording. There we go. Okay. So there we go. All right. So I'm in Blender, and one of the things we actually talked about briefly in our reviews from yesterday was how to get this kind of shading fixed right here, right? And that's really kind of a multi-step process. It's pretty straightforward and pretty easy, but there are kind of two major steps. One, it's easiest to do in object mode, although you can do it to face mode, right? So if I go to faces and I select some faces, you can right click, right? And you can see there is shade smooth there and shade flat. But of course, we can also go for object mode. And if we right click, we'll see a shade smooth there, right? And you'll see when we do a shade smooth, though, on something like this, it kind of over smooths it, right? So we see the bevels get nice and smooth. We see these get nice and smooth, but the walls that we don't really want smooth get smoothed. So we do need to apply that shade smooth, but we can control the angle that the polygons meet at to smooth that. And that's where you go to the little green triangle right here, right? And let me move this down a little more for my projector students. There we go. Let's see here. Kind of always have to do this a little bit during these because the projector cuts that stuff off a bit. There we go. It should be good. All right. So remember, this is green triangle right there. And if you click on that, that brings up many properties for the object, right? We know we have rendering properties, modifiers, several different object properties, even material properties here. It's a good way to think of this as just as like a lot of your properties and options for your tools, this whole menu area. And we see there is a section called normals, right? So this green triangle, normals, and you'll see there's something called auto smooth. When you check that on, you'll see automatically that smooth looks a lot better, right? We can see that these polygons, the normals, are blending together, right? They're kind of, those polygons meet at an edge, right? And that edge has the angle they meet at, there's an angle, right? And so that's what this is controlling, is that it allows it to smooth only to a certain angle. And once that angle is not reached, it won't smooth anymore. So in this case, you can see 30 is actually working pretty well for us. But you can turn it up higher so that only kind of right angles will show it. So it's kind of up to you how big you want that angle. I think 30 for us is going to work. Usually, though, I like something closer to 90 degrees, but not 90 degrees below it. But this one, I think 30 will be fine. But you do have to do that shade smooth, right? You do have to right-click shade smooth. And that generally you have to do for all objects you want smoothed, even when it's in a subdivision surface modifier. So you might remember seeing that a couple times when we did our crab creature. We didn't turn this on because, in general, we wanted the whole crab smoothed, right? But here we do go to the green triangle, normals, auto smooth, right? Auto smooth. Okay, so that gives us that now kind of smooth shaded effect for this model. And I just want to kind of get another nice little video kind of thing for that. Come on. Don't take forever to save. There we go. So I did want to do more booleans. In this case, though, I do want to make maybe a doorway. And I do want this doorway to be not exactly a circle, right? But I think we'll do something like an arch to show you that what you could do is you could actually modify or model whatever your boolean shape was going to be, right? We just used cylinders before, but it's really any object. So if I go to add, and we go to mesh, right, I'm going to create a cylinder again, right? So I create that cylinder, drops it in the center there. Remember, there is this little kind of menu right down here, right? Add cylinder. So if we click on that, right, because this brings up the options for the cylinder. I don't want it to be quite 32 edges, so I think I'm going to make it more like maybe 28. Yep. There we go. So we can, and that's your vertices, right? That's how many it's going to have this way. In fact, you'll see if I kind of left-click drag, you see how you can interactively adjust that, right? And you see that's how many kind of divisions it has around this angle. That's what that vertices control does. I want it enough that it looks pretty rounded. Actually, 24 looks pretty good. I'll leave it at 24. And I also want to make sure to kind of rotate it so that it's kind of on its side this way, right? And we can see that if I want to rotate it this way so that the cylinder kind of top's pointing that way along the Y, the green, I want to rotate it on the red, which is the X, right? And you can always look up here to kind of get that idea what those are. So in this case, I'm going to go to the X and type in 90. And there we go. So you see how right when you're creating the cylinder, if you don't click off of anything else and you just go right to the add cylinder properties right here, you can actually do some adjustments, right? Which could be cool. So in this case, that's good. I'm going to close that down. I'm going to hit W for move so I can kind of move it over here a bit. R for scale. Scale this down a bit there. There we go. Now in this case, though, I want to make something a little bit more like an arch, right? So I'm going to go 1 for vertex mode. And I'm going to select this vertex here and this vertex here. Now you notice that when I did do my divisions, I made sure it had even numbers, right? In particular, even numbers that could divide into another even number, right? Because you could have 26 be your even number. But when you divide that in half, right, that's 13. You notice how I did 28? 28 divides in half to 14, which is another even number. And that way you can actually grab two vertices right across from each other. And if I was to say right-click, remember right-click brings up your vertex context menu, you could do what's called connect vertex pairs. And you see what that does? That makes a nice little edge right through the halfway mark on this guy. All right? So keep that in mind, is that it's always good to use even numbers for these things. And even kind of even numbers that divide into even numbers, right? Particularly if you want to do something like this. So 28 divided by 2 is 14. Those are both even numbers. And then, of course, I right-click again, and there's connect vertex pairs. And that just makes an edge between your vertices. And that then makes it easy for us to select half these faces. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. Now I'm going to show you something that's good to know. We haven't really needed it yet that much in Blender, but you're probably going to start to need it more now. Now you'll notice that right up here I have my selection tools, right? If I left click on this guy right here, there's tweak, there's select box, select circle, select lasso. Q toggles between them, right? So if you just keep hitting Q, it toggles between them. And what I can do is with the rectangle one, because that's our box select, I can just left click drag a box. So it kind of gives us this nice big kind of dotted line box. It's got a little bit of opacity to it. And you see when I do that, it selects everything, but not everything on the other side, right? By default, you don't really have that functionality kind of for backface culling or things like that in Blender when you're in shaded mode. So what I've found is if you do Alt-X, right? Alt-X is your X-ray mode. It's also right there, but there's a quick key for it, Alt-X. When you're in X-ray mode, if you do your box select, that will allow you to grab everything. So X-ray mode is kind of a good way to use the full box select, and it will grab everything it sees or touches. Otherwise, it'll only grab kind of what it directly sees. It won't grab the other side. So remember, there is a quick key for X-ray, Alt-X, right? Alt-X. But it is a button right there too. And there are times when X-ray is cool to have on, and that's one of those times. And then what I could do is I could delete, and then go to the faces option. And now you see that there's kind of an opening down here. Now, of course, I can hit 2 for edge mode, and I can grab an edge here. Grab an edge loop, right? Double click to grab the edge loop. So remember, double left click, right? Selects the whole edge loop, because that's a border edge loop, right? We deleted a face, so that's open, right? There's no polygon there, so these are border edges. I can right click. And one of the options in my edge mode is new from face edges, right? So remember, when you right click, whatever selection type you're in, 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? 1's vertices, 2's edges, 3's faces, 4's object. You'll have your new face from edges, and that will make a polygon. And of course, I had that polygon selected, so I probably just hit 3 and switch to it. And then what I can do is I can just extrude, right? Control E. Grab that yellow plus to move it down. And you see how I easily made an arch? So, believe it or not, when you think about an arch shape, it's really a box, which you can do with an extrusion, right? And half of a circle. So, you create a cylinder, right, on its side, and you make sure it's kind of, something like 28 or 24 or something like that, something that could is even, that divides into an even number by half, right? And then you can easily kind of put those little edges there, so you can delete half of it, and then you have an arch shape, right? And then, of course, I can go back to object mode, and I could line this up kind of right in here. Now, the thing is, you could make this be any kind of shape you wanted to, right? I might want this to actually even have like I'll go to 3 for face mode and R for scale, I'll just make this a little bit bigger so it's kind of a little bit not perfectly an arch, right? And then I'll move this down to kind of be right about here. There we go. And I'm not going to move it all the way down. We'll have a little bit of a lip for our kind of doorway there. But you'll see how I'm making sure to have these two objects intersect each other, right? That's important for doing this boolean that we want to do. So any shape you could do a boolean with, right? Now, if you're just trying to create like a square window or a rectangle window, guys, you don't have to use a boolean, right? That's one of those things, just do inset, do a little bit of scaling to make it more rectangular shaped if you want to, if it's not already. You could just use regular things like extrude and inset to make like a rectangle door or rectangle window. But I wanted to kind of make it a little more futuristic with circular and arch doors. And also because these kinds of shapes lend themselves to be used by booleans, right? Because you can't, actually circle would allow you to get the circular windows if you really wanted to, right? But I wanted to show you some shapes that aren't as obviously easy to model just with some extrusions of some polygons. And so get you guys to kind of see how booleans work and when booleans can be cool and useful. So in this case, I select the room, right? And then we can go back to our blue wrench, right? Our blue wrench right here. And we can go to add modifier. And what we can do is we can grab boolean, right? We can grab boolean. Eventually, I'm going to show you a little bit of the array on tomorrow. And we'll actually even see how you could use this with a empty object to do cool radio arrays for our rim in our car, but that'll be next term's project, right? Not this term's project. But for us right now, we just want to use boolean. And remember, what that does is that now makes this room have the boolean modifier. And we see there's an object right here, right? There's three options: intersect, union, and difference, that kind of do the boolean differently. But you notice it's kind of like a cookie cutter, right? You're taking one shape and you're cutting it out of another shape. But we need to pick the object that's going to be the cutter, right? We select the room because that's what we're going to cut into. And that's what we apply the boolean modifier to. And then we pick the object we want to cut with. Now, the cool thing is you can just click on here and the stuff is in the list. But there is a little kind of eyedropper. If you click on that eyedropper, you'll notice it gives you it available, and then you can actually go in here and pick your object, right? So I can just go right here and say, oh, there's the cylinder. And it applies that. Now, initially, you can't really tell that much because they're both shaded. So remember, you can go back to this guy, right, the kind of arch. And if you go to the kind of orange guy, right, because there's really only one orange and one green, right, the orange kind of box one. If we click on that, remember, you have your viewport display options right here, right? You can open those up. And we've seen those before, right? We kind of did it with our armor for our crab. And what you could do is you could actually say display as wire. And then when you look at this, you can kind of properly see the boolean at work, right? You see how there's actually an opening there. Now, of course, I could go back to the room, go back to the modifier stack, and you see how union kind of keeps the shape, the geometry on this side, whereas difference kind of keeps it on this side. So that's really the difference between union and difference, right? And intersect would do something like that. Usually, most of the time, you're going to want to use union or difference. But you can see there's that arch. Now, the cool thing is because this is a modifier, if I select that arch, I can go in here and I can hit R for scale, and I could scale this arch up to cut more out or less. We could always hit W to move it up. So you see how you have full control over kind of its position. So if you decide after you've done the boolean, you're like, oh, I want to maybe move it around a little bit, you can actually do that. You could technically even go in and still modify it, right? So I can go to 3 for face mode. If I wanted to move just these faces up, that will adjust this as well. So this is one of the neat things, particularly for some of you guys that were with me last year and saw Maya, which is nobody in this classroom right now, but some of you guys at home like Ryan and Giovanni and Chris, Matt, right? Maya's booleans worked, but they were, one, finickier. Two, because you weren't really fully using it as a modifier, it wasn't easy to do this stuff. So the actual boolean modifier in Blender is pretty cool, right? You really, as long as that modifier is still applied, you can go back and do some neat stuff and make adjustments after the fact when you're like, oh, I want to change some stuff, right? Maybe I don't want this to be quite as big, right? I can hit R for scale. So you really have some neat ability to kind of work with booleans a little easier in Blender. So of course I can go 4 for object. I'm going to click on the room because at this point I'm happy with that. So remember, you can go back over to your blue wrench area, right? And remember, there's this little pull down right here. You can click on, and you can go to apply. And that's going to apply your modify, your boolean. So now when I delete that arch, it's gone, right? The faces are still here. They are flipped, right? It's kind of one of the weird things about this. So I go to 3 for face mode. I can always, kind of grab those faces on the back there, hit up arrow to grow selection, right? So remember, in the select menu, select more or less, up and down arrow. That's your grow and shrink. And then, of course, I can always go to mesh, normals, flip. And even here, if I want, I could smooth shade this really quick since I've already done all the other stuff. So right-click, shade smooth, because it can be done to faces also. Let me grab those 2 faces, move them forward a little bit, because we don't need our door to be super, super wide like that. We can hit delete faces. And now we have this kind of nice little arched doorway, right? So this is what's cool about booleans. Are you going to use this on your car? No. I'm going to show you, remember how we kind of did some extrude and bridge border edges on our armor, right? We're going to build a whole car that way. And it's awesome and fast, right? But for architectural things, booleans can kind of be cool, right? That's kind of where, if I'm going to use a boolean, I'll use it as on like a room, a building, where I want to pull out an interesting repetitive shape. Because it's okay to have big n-gons on this thing, right? Just to show this, though, if I was to go and add a subdivision surface modifier, you don't want to, but you notice how bad that gets when you add a subdivision surface modifier because of those n-gons? Guys, this is why n-gons are horrible, right? Basically, if it's flat and planar and you don't need to put it in subdivisional surface mode, it doesn't have to have curvature, it doesn't have to move or deform like a character creature does, you can get away with n-gons. But most of the time, n-gons are just horrible, right? So use them in very, very select situations. All right, the last thing I want to do is I just really wanted to maybe add a little bit more to the roof here, our ceiling, right? So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. And I'm going to select these faces on the top here. There we go. And I'm just going to do an inset, right? Remember, we have that inset tool. We've seen it a couple times right here. I is the quick key, right? So I can just hit I, middle mouse button, and that's going to just inset that in for us, right? Then I can hit W for move, and I can move it up. But remember, what's cool about the inset is you see how that's uniform thickness all the way around? That's what's cool about inset, is that that border stays the same thickness for everything. That's what's great about inset. So I can bring this up here a little bit. And then I can do Alt-C for loop cut. Now, watch what happens when I put this loop cut in. Remember, if you left-click drag, you can put it anywhere. But if you just left-click, it's going to put it right in the middle. So by default, Blender already has a snap to middle. That's just left-click on an edge. If you hold down left mouse button and drag, that's what allows you to put that anywhere you want. So I'll just left-click. Now, since I'm not clicking anywhere else, you'll see that my loop cut and slide options are available down here. And so I can open those up. And one, I could tell it to have more cuts. So I could have 2 cuts. But there's even this thing called smoothness. And if I drag this smoothness up a little bit, maybe to say 0.5, you'll notice how it kind of rounds that shape out a little bit for us, right? So Maya, some of you guys remember from Maya had that edge flow option. That's what smoothness does in loop cut and slide, right? Of course, you just put it right in the middle and then maybe just do one and smooth out and then bevel that if you wanted to. But this is just a great little quick way to get us kind of a little bit more of kind of a dynamic ceiling there, right? Just make this look more futuristic, right? With lots of curves and rounded parts, things like that. All right, so I think that's a great place to stop recording.